Have you ever woken up feeling certain that everything in your life was perfectly in place, only to realize that the ground beneath you was shifting? Have you ever gazed out at a peaceful sunset, thinking you knew exactly where your story was headed, and then discovered that the next chapter was something you couldn't have imagined? Hi there, I'm Barbara, and today I want to take you on a walk down memory lane. But this isn't a stroll through carefree childhood memories or idyllic Sunday afternoons. No, this is the honest, winding path I walked when the people I thought would always protect me turned out to have their own secrets. It's the journey of a young woman with big dreams in a small Ohio town, and how those dreams were tested, reshaped, and ultimately reborn. For 30 minutes, we'll sit together on my front porch, just like I did all those years ago, watching the light change and reflecting on the turns life can take. You won't need a map or prior knowledge of my story. Just bring your curiosity and an open heart. I'll share moments of warmth and humor, moments of disbelief and sorrow, but most of all, moments of discovery. How to find courage when it feels like everything you counted on has crumbled. I promise there won't be any spoilers here. Instead, we'll lean into the questions that guided me forward. How do you know when to trust your instincts? What does it take to stand up for yourself when the world around you seems silent? And how can a single act of kindness from a stranger or a lifelong friend be the spark that lights your way out of darkness? Along the way, we'll pause to consider a few simple ideas you can carry with you: the power of small acts of bravery, the importance of gathering your own evidence, whatever that might look like in your life, and the way a clear decision, no matter how difficult, can open the door to a brand new future. So find a cozy spot, pour yourself something comforting, and let's begin. No rush, no spoilers, just me. You and the stories that taught me that sometimes the hardest truths lead to the greatest strength. Ready to step into the shade of that old cherry tree with me and see what lessons it still holds. Let's go. I grew up believing that a strong foundation like the roots of a tree was all the protection you really needed. In Millville, Ohio, our house sat at the end of Oak Street, its backyard dominated by a sprawling cherry tree that seemed to stretch its arms around the entire neighborhood. That tree was more than decoration. It was our meeting place, our playground, our comfort zone. Under its blossoms, I learned my very first lessons about trust, that family is consistent, neighbors are dependable, and home is the safest place in the world. My parents, Jonah and Dorothy Ferrer, embodied those lessons every day. Dad ran the general store on Main Street. He greeted everyone, children, elderly, strangers, as if they were old friends, tipping his hat with a smile you could feel in your bones. Mom taught first grade at Millville Elementary, her voice the sort that turned boring lessons into adventures. When she wasn't grading papers, she was crocheting granny squares into blankets or tending her vegetable patch behind our garage. Weekends meant fresh strawberry jam and sweet rolls cooling on the windowsill, Mom's laughter drifting on the breeze. Because everything felt so secure, I never questioned how we all fit together. Our little community was like a puzzle, whose pieces clicked perfectly into place. The kids on the street knew the yard rules: be kind, share the fruit, stay until dusk. Parents waved hello when cars drove by. Even the stray cat Whiskers owned us more than we owned him. In Millville's rhythm, nothing seemed out of sync. I assumed my future would mirror that harmony. I'd marry my high school sweetheart, we'd settle in a neighboring town, and life would continue in the same reassuring pattern. From my earliest memories, I associated trust with reliability. If Dad promised he'd pick up my little brother from soccer practice, he was there. If Mom said she'd read one more bedtime story, she didn't stop until her voice was hoarse. Those are simple things, but their impact is profound. When parents deliver on the small commitments, showing up, keeping promises, they are teaching a child how safe the world can be. Contrast that with a friend of mine, Sarah, who grew up in a sprawling suburban development outside Chicago. Her modern 2-story house was equipped with the latest gadgets, smart locks, motion sensors, even an app-controlled thermostat. But emotional security was in short supply. Her parents traveled often for work, and babysitters changed every few weeks. Sarah told me that she could lock down her home in seconds, yet she still felt vulnerable. That felt backward to me. We had no fancy alarm system in Millville, but I never doubted my safety for a second. Those early experiences seep into adulthood. When you grow up trusting that people will do what they say, you enter new relationships, friendships, romances, work, partnerships with a store of optimism and openness. You assume honesty and kindness are the default. In my own life, I carried Millville's lessons with me. When I went off to college, forming study group bonds and campus friendships under the same assumption that everyone was on the same team. Yet trusting too readily can also blind you to warning signs. I once worked on a group project with someone who constantly missed deadlines. I chalked it up to overcommitment, reminding myself of how busy my mom was and how she always pulled through. But that generosity of spirit can become a blind spot instead of recognizing a pattern of unreliability. I made excuses, which cost our team precious time. A healthy foundation of trust means believing people are good until proven otherwise, but it also means staying alert to inconsistencies. If you promise yourself that missed commitments will be addressed, you build trust without becoming naive. In Millville, gossip was a force of nature. It traveled faster than any social media post ever could, and usually with kinder framing. Neighbors cared enough to look out for one another. If your porch light was off at night, someone would ask if you'd forgotten to pay the electric bill, or if you were okay. That kind of communal watchfulness wrapped around me like a blanket. When I moved to Columbus for college, that sense of genuine concern was harder to find. People rushed past each other, earbuds in place, smartphones in hand. It wasn't that big city folk were unkind. It was just that they had learned to prioritize boundaries and self-reliance. In a crowd of thousands, you can't rely on the unrealized promise that someone will always check on you. You have to hold your trust tighter. During my junior year, I organized a volunteer bake sale for a local women's shelter. I trusted my classmates would show up, like my mom trusted Dad to open the store on Saturday mornings. Yet only half the team arrived, leaving me scrambling to frost cupcakes at midnight. The disappointment stung, but it also taught me a valuable skill: building contingency plans. Now, whenever I host an event, I always line up backup helpers or send confirmations the day before. Trust your team, but plan for the times when trust isn't enough. Nurturing trust in your own life. Keep your promises. Whether it's a casual coffee date or a major work commitment, showing up on time and delivering builds your reputation as someone who can be counted on. Communicate early and often. If circumstances change, let people know. A quick text or voicemail shows respect for their time and avoids the sting of unmet expectations. Observe patterns. When someone's behavior consistently falls short, don't blame yourself. It's okay to address issues head on. I noticed you weren't able to meet our deadline again. How can we solve this together? Cultivate small-town kindness. Even in a city apartment, you can practice Millville-style watchfulness. Check on your elderly neighbor, offer to grab groceries for a coworker under the weather, or simply smile and greet the barista by name. Strong roots come from balancing openness with healthy boundaries. Trust freely, but verify regularly, and don't hesitate to adjust when patterns emerge. As much as I cherished Millville's comforting predictability, life has a way of stirring up unexpected wins. In the next section, we'll explore how the innocence of a small-town courtship can be influenced by hidden pressures, financial, familial, and emotional, and why it's essential to recognize early on when love becomes entangled with obligation. Join me for Part 2, Courtship and the Marriage Contract, Love or Convenience, where we'll uncover the fine line between genuine affection and relationships built on unspoken debts. When I look back on those early days, swinging from the branches of our cherry tree, or delivering lemonade to neighborhood kids, I remember the pure thrill of first love. Paul wasn't just another face in our small town. He was the tall, dark-haired young man who stooped to pluck fruit for the children, flashing a grin that made my heart leap. In my 18-year-old mind, this was the beginning of a fairy tale romance, chaperoned walks through Millville Park, secret notes hidden inside library books, Sunday lunches, where he'd pour me the last sip of lemonade. Yet beneath all that sweetness was a subtle undercurrent I didn't grasp at the time. Not every courtship springs purely from the bloom of affection. Sometimes relationships are built knowingly, or not, on debts, favors, or unspoken expectations. In our case, it began innocently enough. Dad admired Paul's steady work ethic. Mom welcomed his polite demeanor. Everyone in town assumed we'd make a picture-perfect match. I believed it too, until I learned that Paul's family owed a debt that had nothing to do with love. In simple terms, most of us think of marriage as the ultimate declaration of love and partnership. We imagine two people pledging their hearts and futures to one another. But in many cultures and situations, marriage also functions as a social or financial contract. Parents might push for alliances that secure family businesses, shore up debts, or preserve land and property. In the 1970s, small-town America, these arrangements were often unspoken, but understood. A family in need could quietly orchestrate a marriage that solved money problems without fanfare or public record. My own story involved a loan Dad had extended to Paul's mother years before we met. When Paul first started dating me, he confided that his family had struggled with medical bills, and Dad had graciously covered them with no interest. Then, one afternoon, after a couple of church picnics and a handful of dates, Dad pulled Paul aside and suggested a mutually beneficial arrangement. If Paul agreed to court and eventually marry my daughter, the loan would be considered paid in full. Paul believed Dad's offer was generous, that it would allow him to settle the debt and move on without guilt. At the time, I felt flattered. After all, who doesn't want to feel chosen? I thought Paul had pursued me out of genuine affection. I didn't stop to wonder why he was so determined, why he always had an excuse to visit our home, or why conversations about our future came up so quickly. It never occurred to me that my own father's pride and sense of obligation might have been steering the ship, while I thought I was the one at the helm. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of my story in places you might not expect. Take the world of social media. and dating apps. Sometimes, an influencer will hail a fairy tale match, sponsored by a brand, or friends will nudge you toward someone because they need a roommate or study partner. Here are a couple of real-life examples. The business merger wedding. A college friend told me about her cousin, who agreed to marry the heir of a family-owned winery. On the surface, they seemed well-matched, shared love of local wine, both from small towns, but it became clear that the union was designed to keep the vineyard in the family, consolidating control and staving off outside investors. Love did blossom later, but the initial spark was undeniably contractual. The roommate arrangement recently. Read about two grad school students who decided to fake date so they could qualify for a 2-bedroom apartment's roommate discount. They picked up a lease, told their landlords they were a couple, and got a steep rate reduction in rent. Months later, they acknowledged that the financial convenience had brought them closer, but their relationship had started with a pragmatic bargain, not a passionate embrace. Recognizing when convenience is masquerading as affection can be tricky. We want to believe that our partner's interest is purely romantic, but sometimes the deal behind the deal is financial loan forgiveness, shared assets, social status, or even the promise of future favor. That doesn't automatically make a relationship unhealthy, but it does add complexity, and it deserves clarity. I wish I'd asked the right questions back then. Instead of taking things at face value, I could have paused and asked Paul, "I notice you visit my house so often. Is everything okay with your family?" Dad, I'm curious what prompted you to offer Paul that loan forgiveness in exchange for marriage. Paul, are we making this decision together, or am I part of someone else's arrangement? If we'd had those conversations, I might have spotted the early warning signs, the unexpected financial pressure, the way my dad's eyes lit up when talking about my future husband, or how Paul often changed the subject when I asked about his motives. Instead, I trusted the surface of things that my father, who had always protected me, would never use me to settle a debt, and that my sweetheart, who had brought me so much joy, was acting solely from the heart. When you assume pure love is the only driver of a relationship, you can miss hidden motivations. I learned this the hard way, but here's a small lesson you can carry with you today. Always seek transparency. A healthy partnership invites open discussion about money, family obligations, and personal history. If someone seems hesitant to talk about their debts or their family's expectations, consider that a gentle warning sign, not necessarily of malice, but of misaligned priorities. After my wedding, life settled into a predictable rhythm. Sunday lunches, regular bank visits, and affectionate nods from neighbors who admired our marriage. But beneath that calm surface, I carried an undercurrent of unease I couldn't name. That feeling grew louder after Mom's illness, and later, after her passing. I realized that convenience, no matter how lovingly arranged, could never replace true emotional connection. As you navigate your own relationships, remember these points. Clarify your why. Ask yourself why you're committing. Is it because you love how that person makes you feel? Is it a shared dream, a common goal, or a practical benefit? All these reasons can coexist, but understanding their weight in your decision is key. Talk money early. Whether it's joint savings, debt, forgiveness, or future investments, money matters affect trust. A frank conversation about who owes what and why can prevent hidden resentments later. Honor autonomy. You're not a bargaining chip. If family or friends propose help that comes with strings attached, your right to choose your partner should remain paramount. Watch for patterned evasions. If questions about commitment, finances, or future plans are consistently sidestepped, consider pausing to investigate further, gently but firmly. True love isn't naive. It's courageous enough to face reality. It's the partner who sits beside you in the hospital, the friend who stays up all night when you can't sleep, the spouse who celebrates your dreams even when it means making sacrifices. Those are the signs you want to seek out and nurture. In my case, I carried Millville's trust into marriage, and that trust became my strength when later tests tried to break me. But I also learned that love grounded in honesty is far more resilient than love built on unspoken contracts. As our journey continues, we'll move from the budding romance and hidden agreements into the uncharted territory of loss and grief. My mother's illness revealed layers of vulnerability I never anticipated, and it marked the moment when the true test of our family's trust began. In Part 3, Grief's Hidden Currents, A Mother's Illness and a Father's Denial, we'll explore how grief can reshape relationships and expose shadows we never knew existed. See you there. When Mom first complained of stomach pains, I chalked it up to her usual teacher stress, late nights, grading papers, extra hours, kneading dough for her preserves, and juggling parent-teacher conferences. In our house, Mom was the center of calm. She solved lunchbox dramas and skinned knee emergencies with the same gentle smile. So when her laughter turned hesitant and her energy waned, it felt like a tremor beneath the surface of everything I thought I knew. It began with a few offhand comments. "I'm just tired," she'd say, waving me away when I offered another cup of tea. Then came the nausea she couldn't shake, the trips to the pharmacist for antacids, the home remedies that brought only temporary relief. I remember standing in our bright kitchen, watching her press a cold compress to her forehead, thinking it was only a passing discomfort. But when she finally agreed to see Dr. Mitchell, our kindly town physician, her diagnosis was as shocking as it was devastating: advanced gastric cancer. In that moment, the safe ground I'd built under my childhood vanished. Watching someone you love suffer is like watching your own heart break day after day. Mom went from making classroom lesson plans one week to whispering goodnight prayers in a hospital bed the next. The trips to the clinic turned into hospital stays. The hospital stays turned into a swirl of chemotherapy morphine drips and hushed conversations between the doctor and my parents out in the hallway. I often snuck a peek through the half-open door, hoping for a glimmer of her old smile. Instead, I saw a woman diminished, frail, gaunt, her bright eyes dulled by pain. My father Jonah surprised me most of all. He continued running the general store with his usual courtesy, tipping his hat at passers-by, greeting customers with a drill owner warmth. But at home, his behavior was strange. He'd slip out before dinner and return late, his suits a little rumpled, his shoulders hunched. When I asked if I could help with the medical bills or research treatment options, he smiled tightly and said, "Your mother doesn't need you worrying about money," then changed the subject. He nodded dutifully at the diagnosis, hugged Mom in a way that seemed rehearsed, and then retreated into a shell of enforced normalcy. I learned later that this is a common stage in what grief experts call denial. In order to keep functioning, tending the store, keeping the household afloat, some people push away the unbearable reality. My dad's denial became a protective cloak, but it also left Mom and me feeling isolated. Without his emotional presence at home, I found myself filling the gap, managing medications, driving her to appointments, even helping her onto a wheelchair. I became Mom's caretaker and Dad's confidant, both straddling roles I wasn't prepared for. One afternoon stands out vividly. Mom was too weak to walk to the dining room table, so I wheeled her through the back door under our old cherry tree. A few neighbors were passing by, and they greeted her with warmth that Mom could no longer muster. I squeezed her hand so she'd feel the support. Then we returned inside. Behind us, Dad watched from the living room window, his face a mask of stoicism. He never asked if she was comfortable. He never touched her hand. Denial had built an invisible wall between them both. Yet, grief isn't a straight line. As much as Dad tried to keep everything business as usual, there were cracks in his facade. Late at night, I'd sometimes hear him stumbling through his study, the old grandfather clock ticking in the dark. I'd open the door quietly and find him staring at a photograph of Mom, young vibrant, wearing the same sun hat she had in her classroom headshots. He'd clear his throat and look away when I spoke, but I knew the grief was there simmering beneath the surface. There's a lesson in this grief. Isn't only the mourner's private sorrow. It's a tide that shapes everyone around it. When one person in a family falls into the current, the others feel the pull too, each in their own way. Anger, denial, depression, or even numbness. In our case, Dad's denial forced me into a caregiver's role far earlier than I expected. I needed to honor my own needs, school friendships, a budding marriage, while tending to Mom's fading health. I remember confiding in my friend Constance, who had lost her grandmother during our sophomore year of college. She told me I felt guilty for laughing with friends, like I was betraying her memory. But I learned that resting and finding joy were part of healing. You can carry love and grief together. That gave me permission to carve out small moments for myself. Reading a book with Dad on the porch swing, laughing over old family anecdotes, so that I wouldn't be consumed entirely by loss. Another practical takeaway: paperwork and planning matter. In the swirl of appointments and hospital visits, I helped Mom set her final wishes in writing a simple service. No black attire music she loved. That act of organization gave all of us a measure of peace. If you're ever in a similar place, having clear directives, advance directives, power of attorney, a will can relieve your loved ones of guesswork when emotions run high. When July rolled around and the monsoon-style rains soaked our town, Mom passed away. It happened in the early afternoon, just as thunder rumbled in the distance. I held her hand and read a passage from her favorite childhood book, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, of all things. She closed her eyes mid-sentence, as if drifting off to sleep, and never woke again. In that moment, grief washed over me like tidal water, cold, relentless, and all-consuming. The funeral was a testament to the life she'd built. Former students, colleagues, neighbors, each holding a jar of homemade jam or a crocheted blanket. I stood beside Dad, watching him greet every well-wisher with a courteous nod, but his eyes remained dry, his face impassive. It wasn't until the crowd thinned that I found him crumbling alone in the chapel vestibule. He buried his face in his hands and wept in a way I'd never seen, as if the denial finally gave way to an ocean of sorrow. That evening, I sat with him on the porch under the cherry tree. The air smelled of wet earth and blossoms drooping under the rain. Without speaking, we shared a mug of chamomile tea. In that silence, I realized grief can't be fought or reasoned away. It must be felt, honored, and shared. Only then can it begin to settle into something you can carry, a heavier load, yes, but one that contains love as well as loss. Before moving on, I want you to remember grief affects each family member differently. When someone seems fine, they may be burying their pain. Offer open ears, not judgment. Self-care isn't selfish. Laughter, rest, and moments of joy are part of healthy grieving. Practical planning, Will's medical directives, financial arrangements can provide an unexpected gift of calm amid chaos. As we leave behind the currents of loss that shaped my life in 1975, the story turns toward shifting dynamics in our household. In the next section, Part 4, Shifting Power Dynamics, When Roles Reverse, we'll see how Dad's denial and my growing responsibilities set the stage for changes none of us anticipated. Join me there as we explore how grief reshapes relationships and reveals hidden vulnerabilities. After Mom's funeral, Dad and I sat together on the porch under our cherry tree, watching the rain turn the blossoms heavy and drippy. He looked older than his years, stooped shoulders, deep lines around his eyes, and I realized how much had changed. The man who once taught me to ride a bike and tossed me onto the back of his motorcycle now needed my help just to climb our front steps. In those quiet moments, I understood that grief didn't just take Mom away. It rearranged every relationship in our family, creating new roles and unexpected responsibilities. When I invited Dad to move in with Paul and me, I pictured it as a temporary measure, a month or two of joint meals and shared memories until he found his footing again. But I didn't anticipate how quickly those roles would reverse. Suddenly, I was the one managing bills, scheduling doctor's appointments, and reminding him to take his medication. Dad, once the decision maker and pillar of strength, became reliant on my encouragement and my car keys to get through the day. At first, it felt natural. After all, I loved him and wanted to care for him. But as days turned into weeks, I noticed subtler shifts. Dad began offering unsolicited advice on how I should run the household, where to hang the curtains, how to arrange the dishes in the cabinet, even what dresses I should wear. His gentle encouragement about proper decorum felt less like fatherly pride and more like a reminder that I now occupied his domain. Meanwhile, Paul, once my partner in our small home, drifted into long hours at the bank and late nights at O'Malley's Tavern. The balance we once shared, love chores, laughter tilted in Dad's favor, leaving me sandwiched between his dependence and Paul's distance. Power dynamics in families often follow an unspoken script. Parents guide, children learn. When that script flips, confusion and tension can set in. I realized I was experiencing caregiver burnout, an exhaustion people often feel when the support they give outweighs the support they receive. It's a bittersweet labor driven by love, but tinged with resentment. I found myself snapping at Paul for minor things: a cold glass of milk left on the counter, a late text that I had to leave unread on my nightstand. I resented Dad's growing authority, even though I knew he was simply trying to regain his place of respect in our home. I'm not alone in facing this reversal. Take my friend Marcus, for example. When his father suffered a stroke, Marcus moved into the family home to help with rehabilitation. Within weeks, his father began micromanaging his work-from-home schedule and commenting on his cooking. Marcus felt torn between gratitude and irritation, grateful to guide his dad through recovery, yet frustrated by the loss of personal autonomy. Over coffee one afternoon, he told me I love him more than anything, but sometimes I miss the days when I could make a bad omelet without an expert critique. Recognizing these shifts can be the first step toward restoring balance. I learned that setting boundaries doesn't mean withholding care. It means clarifying expectations so everyone knows their role. I sat Dad down one evening and gently said, "I want to help you, but I also need you to respect how I run our home with Paul. Let's agree that household decisions are made together." "Okay." He looked surprised, but then nodded. It was a small moment of mutual respect that eased our tension. At the same time, I had to address the growing gulf between Paul and me. In the early days of our marriage, we divided chores. He'd tackle the bills. I'd handle dinner so each of us felt valued. But as Dad's needs increased, Paul slipped into the background, excusing his absence with new responsibilities at the bank. One evening, I shared how overwhelmed I felt. He listened quietly, then admitted that he'd been avoiding home because he felt like a bystander in a family crisis. We agreed to carve out us time twice a week. No Dad, no work. Just the two of us reconnecting over coffee or a walk in the park. Sharing responsibilities more equitably helped me breathe again. I set up a medication calendar for Dad and scheduled a weekly check-in with his doctor tasks that freed Paul from stepping in at odd hours. In turn, Paul committed to handling weekend grocery shopping and doing laundry. With Dad, Paul arranged to drive him to the store every Thursday morning, giving me a built-in break to focus on my embroidery projects, the creative pastime that always grounded me. Another useful strategy was seeking outside support. I contacted a local caregiver support group at the senior center down the street. Hearing other adult children's stories of exhaustion, guilt, and small victories reminded me I wasn't alone. One woman shared how she enlisted a neighbor to drop by once a week for a chat with her mom, giving her precious hours to run errands. I adapted this idea by hiring a part-time aide to help Dad with light housekeeping. It meant a small expense, but the reprieve was priceless. Through all this, I learned that reversed roles don't have to become power struggles. With open communication, clear boundaries, and creative solutions, families can find a new equilibrium. I realized that caring for Dad honored my love for Mom, who had always kept our family close. And by leaning on Paul in turn, I strengthened our partnership instead of letting distance erode it. As the weeks turned into months, Dad regained some independence. His strength returned. Gradually, he cooked simple meals again, visited old friends at the store, and even offered to help with the dishes once in a while. Our home felt alive with shared purpose, Dad contributing where he could, Paul present and attentive, and me bridging love and practicality. And yet, beneath that newfound balance, there was an undercurrent I couldn't shake. Dad's behavior around me, his lingering touches, the way he praised me for looking like Mom, sometimes made my skin crawl. Paul's late-night outings grew more frequent, and whispered phone calls flicked on warning lights in my mind. The family roles may have settled, but a sense of unease settled into my life, like an unwelcome houseguest. Before we explore those suspicions in depth, remember that power shifts are natural when life throws curveballs. By communicating honestly, tapping community resources, and protecting your own needs, you can transform role reversals into opportunities for deeper connection. In the next section, Part 5, Suspicion and Investigation, piecing together the puzzle. We'll walk through the quiet clues, hushed conversations, and late-night detective work that first made me question whether the changes in our home were more than a reaction to grief. See you there. I remember the moment I first felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle as though my body were sounding an alarm I hadn't yet learned to interpret. It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd planned a quiet dinner at home with Paul and my father. I'd prepared roast chicken, Dad's favorite, and set the table under the soft glow of the dining room lamp. But Paul never showed up at 6 o'clock, as he had promised. He wasn't just a few minutes late. He returned at nearly 9, shrugging off my worried questions with a tired bank, kept me after hours again. Dad merely nodded as though he'd expected it. I tried to brush it off. After all, banks sometimes ran late. Everyone understood. Still, something tugged at me, a memory of overheard tones between Paul and my father in hushed corners, urgent and conspiratorial. I couldn't shake the feeling that my home was full of secrets I needed to unearth. Over the next few days, I began keeping a small journal by the kitchen counter. Every time Paul or Dad arrived home late, I jotted down the time, the excuse, and any odd details. A whiff of whiskey on Paul's coat. Dad's distant gaze as he handed me his hat. I noted phone calls Paul answered in the hallway, with his voice lowering to a whisper. I recorded the dates and times of those conversations. March 12th at 8:15 p.m., a 10-minute call. March 14th at 7:45 p.m., a 5-minute call, and so on. I wasn't trying to build a conspiracy case in my mind, just gathering pieces of the puzzle. One afternoon, I confided in my friend Marianne, who worked with Paul at the bank. We sipped iced tea on my porch. I told her, Marianne, I'm worried about Paul. He's always coming home late and claiming overtime. The bank's schedule doesn't line up with that. She looked at me with genuine concern. Oh, Barbara, she said, stirring her tea. We haven't done mandatory overtime in months. Ever since Mr. Mendez became manager, they're strict about closing at 6. If Paul was staying late, someone would notice. I felt a pang of relief mixed with dread. I wasn't making it up. Marianne's candor confirmed my suspicion. Paul's story didn't match reality. That evening, instead of confronting him outright, which can backfire, if you're wrong, I decided on a more discreet approach. I set up a simple chart on a bulletin board in my home office, arranging sticky notes in a calendar grid. For each late night or whispered call, I placed a yellow note. For Dad's odd visits, those times he needed to discuss private matters with Paul, I used blue notes. Before long, I could see patterns emerging nearly every Thursday and Friday night. Both men occupied themselves in secretive ways. I also reviewed our joint phone bill. Even in 1975, long-distance calls and certain switchboard transfers were flagged differently. I found that Paul's off-hours calls weren't to the home line, they were to an unlisted number 1. Neither Dad nor I ever mentioned. I highlighted those call records in pink. At this point, my investigation felt less like snooping and more like sleuthing, searching for clarity in a web of half-truths. If my marriage and my family life were built on shaky ground, I wanted to know just how unstable that ground was. I told myself, gather evidence first, confront later. A practical step I took was installing a simple wire telephone directly in the kitchen, where they always passed on their way in, to replace the less-used extension phone in the bedroom. That way, I'd have a clear record of calls, and it removed the excuse that they couldn't remember which line they used. Within a week, patterns persisted. Paul's calls continued at odd hours, and Dad's visits to his suit wardrobe in the bedroom spiked. To me, it all pointed toward a collusion I couldn't fully name. Encouraged by Marianne's help, I reached out to another confidant, my neighbor Sally, whose home was just next door. We arranged for coffee and cookie mornings, ostensibly to catch up, but also so Sally could notice any unusual comings and goings at our house. Sally agreed with a knowing look. Anything I see, I'll let you know immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, she reported that she'd seen Paul sneaking out past her back gate after midnight and spotted Dad pacing in the yard at odd hours. One evening, determined to get a first-hand glimpse, I stayed up late, reading by the living room lamp. At midnight, I heard the creak of the back door. I silently moved to the hallway, peered around the corner, and saw Dad and Paul whispering on the porch. I noted every gesture, Paul's anxious glances toward the kitchen window, Dad's hand resting on Paul's shoulder, in a gesture that was less comforting parenthood and more mutual plotting. I didn't catch their words, but the body language was chilling. With my bulletin board now crowded and my phone record chart overflowing, I realized I had enough to approach Paul with evidence rather than accusations. The lesson was clear: when your instincts alert you to something off, don't rush to judgment. Collect data, look for corroboration, and compare stories against facts. Emotions can cloud your view, but patterns rarely lie. One night, I printed the weekly schedule and phone logs and laid them out on the dining room table. I waited until Paul returned, then said, "Let's talk." He looked startled, first at seeing the charts, then at realizing I'd done my homework. He tried to brush it off as curiosity, as though I'd simply been bored. Instead of attacking him, I calmly pointed to the discrepancies. "On Thursday and Friday nights, you said you were working, but Marianne confirmed no overtime. These calls weren't to the bank line. And Dad, why did you leave the store early on those same evenings?" His eyes flickered between the sticky notes and the phone logs, confusion shifting to guilt. At that moment, I saw two choices: continue to demand answers or escalate by bringing in a witness. I chose the latter. I called Sally, who arrived minutes later and took a seat by my side. "I've seen him leave late," she said softly, "and I've watched your father pacing out here, looking like he was waiting for something." The presence of a second observer changed the dynamic. Paul went pale, and Dad's usual confidence faltered. I didn't demand a confession that night. Instead, I laid out a simple truth: I love both of you, but I cannot live with secrets. I need transparency, or I need distance. I didn't mention divorce or punishment. I simply asserted that trust could not survive in the darkness. That tactical choice to gather and present evidence calmly with witnesses gave me the control I needed. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was a measured unveiling. In those quiet minutes under the dining room light, I saw the first cracks in their facade. As you navigate your own suspicions, whether in family friendships or work, remember these guiding principles. Follow your instincts, but don't let them run wild. Use facts to ground your feelings. Enlist trusted allies. A credible witness can validate your concerns. Keep clear records. Notes, phone logs, and simple charts can speak louder than emotions. Approach with calm, not confrontation. Present evidence neutrally to invite honest dialogue. With the puzzle pieces now laid bare, I realized our next step would be deciding how to act on this revelation. In Part 6, Betrayal in the Bloodline, Discovering Hidden Obsessions, we'll explore the horrifying details I unearthed, the hidden photographs, the secret agreements, and the betrayal that ran deeper than I ever imagined. Join me there as we uncover the darkest corner of this puzzle and learn how facing the truth head-on can become the most courageous act of all. After assembling my charts, phone logs, and witness statements. I felt a grim certainty growing in the pit of my stomach. Whatever secret Dad and Paul were keeping had to be far more serious than mere after-work drinks. But nothing prepared me for the moment I discovered the truth, a truth so twisted it made my blood run cold. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I'd suggested Dad clear out the spare bedroom to make room for the aide who would help him with light housework. He protested at first. "My things are safe here," he insisted, but eventually acquiesced. As I began moving boxes and neatly folding his clothes, I noticed a bulge under the mattress. Curiosity pricked at me. Why would he hide anything under there? I pulled the mattress edge back and found a manila envelope, yellowed at the corners and heavily taped. Hands trembling, I carried the envelope to the dining room table and carefully cut it open. Inside were dozens of photographs, some old, some recent, depicting my mother at various stages of her life. Many were benign: Mom smiling in the garden, Mom teaching a classroom of giggling first graders. But mixed among them were images that made my skin crawl, photos of Mom in intimate situations, alone, in her bedroom, wearing delicate undergarments. The angles were voyeuristic, taken without her knowledge. Even more disturbing, interspersed between those were clippings from magazines, women whose faces resembled my mother's, posed provocatively in lingerie. Each clipping was labeled with dates, notes, in Dad's spidery handwriting: March 68, Dorothy's birthday, June 69, summer garden dress, April 72, wedding anniversary. My breath caught. Not only had Dad been photographing Mom in private moments, he'd kept a secret catalog, a twisted tribute to an obsession I never imagined. The manila envelope also contained a folded handwritten note. It was addressed to Paul and read, "Remember our agreement: once Barbara marries and settles the debt, your part is to keep things discreet. You know what must happen and when." My world tilted. The agreement I'd uncovered in part 2, which had already felt like a betrayal of my heart, now took on a horrifying new dimension. It wasn't simply about money. It was a corrupt arrangement that bound Paul and my father together in a pact that exploited both me and my mother. My refusal to look at the full depth of Dad's secrets had left me blind to the monster who'd lived under my roof. As I stared at those photos, I remembered odd comments Dad had made over the years. Dorothy always looked so lovely without that gaudy wedding veil. Or, I missed the way she wore that silk nightgown. At the time, I'd assumed it was nostalgia, harmless sentimentality. Now, I saw it for what it was: the grooming of a widow's memories and the manipulation of a daughter's image in place of her mother's. Grooming isn't just a term for predators targeting children. It can also describe how someone manipulates trust and memory to normalize disturbing behaviors. Dad had groomed me to see him as my protector, and he'd groomed Paul to see me as a means to settle his debt. Only when I found the envelope did the pattern snap into focus. I sat back in my chair, the envelope open before me, like a coffin lid. I felt a wave of nausea, a betrayal so deep it rattled the foundations of my identity. This wasn't just financial or emotional exploitation. It was a violation of privacy and decency on the most intimate levels. In that moment, I knew I needed to confirm what the note implied. I gathered the photos and note, and with trembling hands, approached Paul in the living room. He was reading the evening paper, worry lines already etched on his face by the pending confrontation I'd hinted at. I placed the envelope on the coffee table and said, "Paul, I found this." His face went ashen when he saw the pictures. He stammered, trying to deny or explain, but the horror in his eyes was the only confession I needed. "It was supposed to stay hidden," he finally whispered. "Your father. He said these were for him alone. Your face reminded him of her of Mom, and he wanted to feel like she was still here." The self-pity in his voice made bile rise in my throat. "And the agreement?" I asked. He closed his eyes. I thought I was helping. I never meant for it to go this far. I realized then that betrayal often comes in layers. First, the betrayal of my trust, when Paul agreed to marry me for a debt. Second, the betrayal of my mother's memory, when Dad collected those intimate snapshots. Third, the betrayal of my own sense of safety in my home. The realization was brutal. The two men I loved most were complicit in acts that tore me apart from within. Yet anger alone wouldn't give me the strength to move forward. I knew I had to transform this outrage into action. If I allowed myself to sink into despair, Dad's predations and Paul's cowardice would continue to hold power over me. Instead, I folded the photos and note, secured them in a sealed envelope, and carried them to Sally's house. As a trusted friend and witness, her presence would be essential when I confronted Dad. On the way, I steeled my resolve by reminding myself of the lessons I'd learned. Evidence empowers. Having tangible proof of wrongdoing, those photos and that note meant I could confront betrayals with authority, not just emotion. Allies amplify credibility. Involving Sally would turn my story from "she said" into "we witnessed together," making it harder for Dad to gaslight or dismiss my claims. Your voice matters. Silence ensures the predator's victory. By speaking up, I reclaimed agency over my life and my mother's memory. When Sally opened her door, I barely spoke, simply handed her the envelope and watched her eyes widen. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I nodded. It's time he answers for what he did to her and to me. As we planned our next steps, calling Paul in to bear witness, deciding whether to bring in legal counsel, and preparing for the emotional whirlwind ahead, I felt a spark of clarity amid the devastation. Discovering hidden obsessions was painful, but it also marked the turning point when betrayal lost its power to paralyze me. Hidden betrayals thrive in darkness. By shining a light, seeking evidence, enlisting support, and speaking truth, I found the courage to dismantle the twisted legacy my father had built. In doing so, I honored my mother's dignity and reclaimed my own. With the envelope secured and Sally at my side, I realized the final harrowing step was upon me. In Part 7, The Night of Terror and the Aftermath, Trauma Shock and Self-Rescue, we'll confront the darkest hour of my life and explore how hitting rock bottom revealed a wellspring of resilience I never knew I had. Join me there as we face that night's terror and discover the path toward healing and justice. It was a rainy Thursday when everything finally came crashing down. I had spent the afternoon methodically preparing dinner, masking my nerves with the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and seasoning chicken. Dad had arrived home early, unusual, but I attributed it to a slow day at the store. Paul left shortly after, as I later pieced together, probably heading out to meet whoever he'd been meeting these past weeks. When Dad offered me a glass of wine to calm my nerves, I hesitated, but accepted. It tasted slightly bitter, but fatigue from the long day dulled my senses. I can't say precisely when the haze began, only that the next memory is fractured, dim light, the shifting weight of someone behind me, and a whisper I barely recognized. You're just like her," Dad murmured. The shock hadn't fully registered. I assumed the wine had simply knocked me off balance. Then, the cold realization hit: this wasn't affection or nostalgia. It was a predator's advance, disguised in a father's voice. Instinct took over. I tried to push away, but my limbs felt leaden. Panic surged as I realized something was terribly wrong. In that moment of terror, a single thought cut through the blur. I need to get out of here. I summoned every ounce of strength to stiffen my arms, tense my shoulders, and break free. I bolted upright, gasping, and ran toward the bathroom, Dad's footsteps thundering behind me. I locked the door, turned on the hottest water I could bear, and pulled my clothes through the stream. In that scalding shower, I scrubbed at my skin, trying to wash away more than just the wine, trying to scrub away fear, shame, and the violation of trust itself. Water pooled on the floor and ran cloudy with soap and the remnants of trauma. Sexual assault by someone you should trust most, your own parent, triggers a unique form of trauma. It shakes the very foundation of your identity. You question your own body's memory. Did you allow it? Did you provoke it? The mind races into self-blame, a dark spiral that can feel impossible to escape. In that shower, between the sting of hot water and the ache in my chest, I felt every piece of myself fracture. But amid that chaos, an ember of self-rescue glowed. I remembered the advice I'd once given a friend: if you ever feel in danger, go to the brightest, most public place you can find and don't stop calling for help. I wrapped myself in the torn remains of my nightgown, grabbed my keyring, and slipped quietly down the hall. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my house key, but I managed to unlock the front door and step into the rain, where the streetlight glowed weakly through the drizzle. I dialed Sally's number with trembling fingers. Each ring echoed like a drumbeat in my ears. "Barbara, it's late. What's wrong?" she asked, grogginess in her voice. Dad, I choked out. He tried. My words dissolved in sobs. I gave her the address, then collapsed into the damp grass by the porch, soaked but alive, waiting for her car's headlights to cut through the darkness. When Sally arrived, she didn't hesitate. She wrapped me in her raincoat, steered me into her car, and drove me straight to the emergency room. The hospital staff, trained for crisis, whisked me into a private room, offered a gentle blanket, and explained each step of the examination, collecting forensic evidence, assessing my injuries, ensuring my physical and mental safety. I felt a deep relief wash over me. Finally, someone was acknowledging the horror I'd endured and treating me like a survivor, not a troublemaker. In the days after shock held me in its grip, I slept irregularly, relived blurred fragments of the assault, and fought waves of nausea that seemed tied to the memory itself. Everyday tasks, answering the phone, checking the mail, felt loaded with fear. Still, I clung to routines, taking prescribed medications, attending follow-up medical appointments, and leaning on Sally's steadfast presence. She helped me fill out paperwork for a restraining order against Dad and arranged for a counselor specializing in sexual trauma. Trauma isn't just a single event. It's the cascade of aftershocks that follow. I learned that self-rescue involves both immediate action, getting to safety, seeking medical care, and sustained care therapy, support groups, and small rituals that help the mind reclaim normalcy. For me, one of those rituals was brewing my morning chamomile tea and writing in my journal about each small victory. I slept through the night for 4 hours, or I called the counselor today. Those notes became proof of progress on days when despair threatened to swallow me whole. Legal and medical follow-through are practical necessities. I kept copies of my medical reports, photos of injuries, and the hospital's forensic kit paperwork organized in a folder labeled Evidence. Having a central place for these documents meant I didn't have to scramble when filling out police reports or talking with my attorney. It also reminded me I wasn't imagining things. Each paper and photo stood as testimony to the truth. Another key step was reclaiming my space. Dad's house had become a site of terror. With Paul's help and under the guidance of my attorney, I collected essential belongings, clothes, medications, my journal, and moved into a small apartment near Sally's home. Setting up that new space, choosing the color of the walls, arranging my own photographs, felt like planting a personal flag. Here is safety. Here is renewal. Recovery from an assault by a family member requires time and patience. I attended a weekly support group for survivors of parental abuse. Listening to others' stories and sharing my own taught me I wasn't alone, and that my experience, however extreme, fit within a painful but survivable pattern. One woman in the group, Clara, told me, survival is a series of tiny steps, putting one foot in front of the other, day after day. That simple phrase became my mantra on mornings when fatigue or grief threatened to freeze me in place. In parallel, I began gentle movement, short walks in the park, stretches in my living room, mindful breathing exercises. Physical activity helped reconnect me with my body on my own terms. I learned that self-rescue isn't about getting over it quickly. It's about slowly re-inhabiting a body that was violated with patience and care. Friends and allies played a crucial role. Paul, racked with guilt, joined counseling with me, not to justify his earlier failings, but to understand how to support my healing. Sally became my sister in arms, alerting me if Dad tried to contact me, and celebrating each new page I wrote in my journal. My therapist taught me grounding techniques, naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. Simple drills that anchored me when the world felt like it might dissolve. As weeks turned into months, the acute terror began to ease. I still bristled at the memory of Dad's voice calling me Dorothy, or the sting of someone else's hands on my skin, but I also felt a growing tide of empowerment, proof that I'd escaped the darkest night and taken concrete steps toward safety. Before we move on, here are some practices that helped me transform trauma into the first chapters of a new life. Immediate safety first. Get to a well-lit public place. Call a trusted friend or 911 if needed. Seek medical and forensic care. Early evidence collection preserves options for legal recourse and validates your experience. Organize documentation. Keep medical reports, photographs, and legal paperwork in a dedicated folder. Build a support network. Lean on friends, counselors, and support groups to share the burden and receive validation. Reclaim your space. Establish a new safe environment where you control every aspect of your surroundings. Tiny steps. Daily practice. Grounding exercises. Journaling. Small wins and gentle movement help rebuild trust in your body and mind. With the ashes of that night behind me, I felt ready to face the next challenge, finding justice on my own terms. In Part 8, Crafting Personal Justice, Confrontation and Tactical Exposure, we'll explore how I used the evidence I'd gathered to stage a measured confrontation enlist credible witnesses, and force the men who betrayed me into the light. That's the next step on the path from survivor to victor, and I can't wait to share it with you. When I first began piecing together the evidence, phone logs, secret photographs, whispered conversations, I felt a powerful mix of fear and resolve. Fear that Dad or Paul might twist the story and cast me as the unstable one. Resolve that justice, in whatever form it took, would be far sweeter than silence. I realized that personal justice doesn't always require lawyers or courtroom drama. Sometimes it's a matter of strategic planning, carefully orchestrated exposure, and bringing the right witnesses into the light. I started by gathering everything into one place. My justice folder contained the manila envelope with the photographs and my father's notes, copies of my phone log charts annotated with dates and little check marks next to Marianne's confirmation about the bank's hours, written statements from Marianne and Sally, each describing what they'd seen and heard and when, relevant pages from my journal detailing my immediate reactions after the assault, and the night-by-night records of late arrivals and secret calls. Having this folder gave me a concrete sense of control. I could hold it in my hands and know that facts, not rumors, formed my case. I also made several photocopies, one set for Paul, one for Dad, one to share with a trusted attorney as a contingency, and one to keep in a safe deposit box. In situations of betrayal, paranoia can creep in, so distributing copies ensured no single party could destroy all the evidence. Next, I chose the timing and setting for the confrontation. I wanted neutral ground, somewhere familiar enough to feel safe, but formal enough to convey seriousness. I settled on the living room of my small apartment, the one I'd moved into after the assault. It had comfortable seating, good lighting, and a clear line of sight between the entrance and the couch, so there'd be no sneaking in or escaping unnoticed. I invited Paul first. I called him gently. "Can you come over this evening? There's something important I'd like to talk about." He arrived on time, his face drawn with guilt and worry. I offered him a cup of chamomile tea, the one thing I'd come to associate with calm, and we sat across from each other. I placed my justice folder on the coffee table between us. I began not with accusation, but with a calm, neutral statement, "Paul, I want to understand everything. I have these documents that raise questions. Why you were late those nights. Why you spoke to Dad in hushed tones. The envelope I found under the mattress." I slid the envelope toward him. His eyes flicked to the photos, then to my steady gaze. I didn't shout or cry. I held myself with quiet confidence. He reached hesitantly for the envelope. As he unfolded the photos and read Dad's instructions, I saw the color drain from his face. Rather than launch into an angry retort, he simply nodded, as though each fact stitched a new wound in him. After a long silence, he murmured, "I'm sorry, I was afraid." It wasn't a justification, but it was acknowledgement, a vital first step. With Paul's private confession secured, I brought in my first witness, Sally. She arrived shortly after Paul's admission, and together we reviewed his notes, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Sally's presence had two effects. It bolstered my credibility. "You're not imagining this. I saw it too." And it demonstrated to Paul that I had a network of support, not just my own solitary voice. Our next move was to bring Dad into the light. I arranged a meeting at my apartment, sending him a polite, factual note. "Your daughter wishes to discuss family matters. Please come by tomorrow at 5 p.m. As nervous as I felt, I knew that controlling the invitation, date, time, place, put me in the driver's seat. When Dad arrived, he looked every bit the respected store manager. Neat suit trimmed, mustache, courteous nod. I offered water, then closed the door behind him. I laid out the justice folder, without emotion. Dad, I began softly, you've always taught me to face the truth. Here are the photos you took of Mom, the notes you passed to Paul, and the statements from Marianne and Sally. I need to know why. He stiffened his jaw, working, as though he were chewing something bitter. He denied at first. You've misinterpreted. But when I slid over the copy of his note to Paul, his facade cracked. He admitted that his grief had twisted into obsession, that he'd rationalized his actions as a way to keep Mom's memory alive. Yet the instructions to Paul, ensure discretion, fulfill your part, revealed a darker pact both men stood to gain from my silence. This is where personal justice diverges from vengeance. My goal wasn't to destroy Dad wholly, but to dismantle the power his secrets gave him. Public exposure wasn't about shaming for its own sake. It was about dismantling a corrupt foundation so I could rebuild on honest ground. To ensure accountability, I gave Dad 2 options. Accept the consequences of his actions, agree to leave my life permanently, and let the men's pact dissolve, or face wider exposure. I reminded him discreetly of our local sheriff, a man known for supporting abuse survivors, and of the possibility of legal action. It wasn't a threat delivered in anger, but a sober outline of choices and their outcomes. Dad's eyes brimmed with tears. He murmured, I never meant to hurt you. I replied, intent doesn't erase impact, but I believe you have the human decency to honor the truth. He nodded slowly, and with Sally and Paul, as witnesses, agreed to vacate the small apartment building where he'd been living temporarily. I insisted he take only a single suitcase and leave behind anything not rightfully his. With that agreement, I felt a weight lift. The secret pact lay broken, and the men who'd conspired against me faced the reality of their choices. Paul left soon after, to no rage or shouting, just a quiet resolve to make amends in whatever ways he could from a distance. Personal justice isn't always neat or swift, but it can be precise. By gathering evidence, recruiting witnesses, and offering clear choices, I turned the tables on betrayal. I reclaimed my autonomy, disrupted the cycle of abuse, and set firm boundaries for my future. Before we move on, here are some guiding principles for crafting your own personal justice. Consolidate your evidence, organize documents, dates, witness statements, and any physical proof in a single portable folder. Select a neutral setting. Choose a place you control your home, a private office where you can manage timing, entry, and exit. Leverage credible witnesses. A second or third person's account multiplies your credibility and deters gaslighting. Offer clear choices. Lay out the facts and the consequences in a calm, respectful manner to allow space for acknowledgement or departure. Maintain your composure. Emotion has its place, but a steady demeanor underscores your authority and clarity of purpose. With the pact shattered and those who betrayed me out of my life, I stood at a crossroads. Ahead lay the work of rebuilding my world on honest foundations. In Part 9, Rebirth Through Action, Divorce, Relocation, and Reinvention, we'll explore how I transformed trauma into opportunity, using my new freedom to pursue education, career, and a life filled with genuine connection. I can't wait to share that next chapter with you. When the dust settled after confronting Dad and Paul, I found myself standing at the threshold of a new life, one unrecognizable from the quiet predictability of Millville. The pact that had bound my marriage in silent obligation lay in tatters, and the walls of our shared home still echoed with memories I could no longer bear. It was time for decisive action, divorce, relocation, and the reinvention of my identity. Ending a marriage is never easy, even when it's built on betrayal. I remember sitting across from the family attorney, clutching my justice folder, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Paul, in his own way, had apologized and offered to make amends by freeing me from every legal and financial tie he had to me. Together, we drafted the separation agreement. I would keep half of the house proceeds, while he would take full responsibility for the debt to his mother, a debt paid in more ways than one. He agreed to sign the papers within a week, and I felt a bittersweet victory as his signature sealed our parting. In that lawyer's office, I realized that divorce is a form of personal liberation. It can't erase the past, but it can remove the chains that prevent you from moving forward. I wasn't the same 18-year-old under that cherry tree. I was a survivor who'd claimed her voice. With the legal separation behind me, I sold my share of the house at fair market value. The sale closed within 30 days, thanks to a local realtor who specialized in quick turnovers. I walked away with a modest nest egg, enough to start over somewhere new. Choosing where to go felt overwhelming. Part of me longed for the anonymity of a big city. Another part craved the stability of familiar surroundings. In the end, I chose Chicago, a place I'd visited once in college, where I'd felt the hum of possibility in the air. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a tree-lined neighborhood close to Lake Michigan. Its bright living room reminded me of hope, and its narrow kitchen felt cozy, perfect for brewing my morning chamomile tea and watching the sun filter through the curtains. Relocation isn't just a change of address, it's a chance to rewrite your story. I unpacked my boxes with intention, teaching credentials, embroidery projects, and framed photographs of Mom and me. I left behind the worn doilies and Dad's decorative tchotchke symbols of a life I'd outgrown. Instead, I filled my shelves with books on family law and domestic violence advocacy subjects I'd discovered with urgency during my own ordeal. That decision to pursue law school was born from both anger and purpose. I wanted to ensure other women didn't suffer in silence, as I had, not just with emotional support, but with professional expertise. I enrolled in evening classes at the University of Chicago Law School, balancing homework with part-time work as a paralegal at a firm that specialized in survivors' rights. The workload was intense, late nights poring over case law, early mornings summarizing affidavits, but each lecture fueled my conviction that knowledge is power. Along the way, I found mentorship in an unexpected place, the shelter where I'd volunteered during the bake sale fundraiser back in Columbus. Its director, Ms. Reyes, remembered me. "You have fire in your eyes, Barbara," she said, when I announced my law school plans. She connected me with pro bono programs where I could gain courtroom experience defending abuse survivors. Her faith in me felt like a balm, calming the self-doubt that occasionally whispered, "What if you can't do this?" Reinvention also meant rebuilding my social circle. Chicago's pace was brisk, and friendships formed differently than in Millville. I joined a book club at the local library, bonding over novels that explored resilience and renewal. I attended workshops on women's leadership and networked with fellow students during lunchtime breaks. These connections were about more than career. They were about community, a reminder that healing grows best when nurtured by others. A practical step I took was setting monthly goals. I created a simple spreadsheet with 3 columns: academic milestones, personal well-being, and community engagement. Under academic milestones, I listed tasks like draft memo on protective orders or attend moot court competition. In personal well-being, I included yoga class twice weekly and visit therapist every other week. For community engagement, I wrote, volunteer at shelter fundraisers, and mentor one first-year student. Checking off each item gave me a tangible sense of progress and kept me grounded through the whirlwind of change. One evening, after a long day of classes and paralegal work, I met Charles, a university professor, who taught modern literature. We both lingered near the coffee station, a humble spot, but it became the launching pad for our first conversation about Kathy's Wuthering Heights and the nature of redemption in art. His easy humor and genuine curiosity drew me in. Over the following months, he became a constant, attending my moot court PURVD and surprising me with tea and biscuit care packages during exam week. In Charles, I found a partner who honored my past but never pestered me for details I wasn't ready to share. As graduation approached, I celebrated not only my degree, but the miles I'd traveled from the frightened woman who fled her childhood home. I passed the bar exam on my first try, and within weeks, I joined a legal clinic dedicated to domestic violence survivors. My first case involved securing a protective order for a young mother, someone I could see myself in years ago, when I thought my mother's illness was the worst crisis I'd face. Guiding her through paperwork, I felt a profound sense of purpose, turning my trauma into advocacy. Reinvention isn't instantaneous. It's a gradual unfolding of who you choose to become. In the months after law school, I refined my approach to self-care. I started keeping a joy journal, noting moments of gratitude, the warmth of my apartment's late afternoon light, Charles's gentle encouragement, the laughter of new friends, gathered for a homemade potluck. Those entries, simple, fleeting, became touchstones, reminding me that happiness lives in small details. I also practiced saying yes to possibility. I accepted an invitation to speak at a local campus event, sharing my journey with students. I joined a church choir, rediscovering the comfort of song in community. Last spring, I organized a fundraiser for a legal aid society, bringing together colleagues and friends for an evening of music and storytelling. Each yes chipped away at fear, expanding my circle and reinforcing my new identity. Near the end of my first year as a practicing attorney, Charles and I hosted a small gathering in our apartment book club. Friends, colleagues from the clinic, cherished neighbors. I looked around the room at faces full of warmth and realized I'd built a life woven from resilience, compassion, and shared purpose. My roots in Millville remained a cherry tree memory in my heart, but my branches reached wide, embracing reinvention in every direction. As you consider your own path to rebirth, remember that action transforms. Whether it's ending a relationship that no longer serves you, moving to a new city, or pursuing a long-suppressed dream, each choice carries power. You don't need grand gestures. Thoughtful steps, legal separation, relocation, educational pursuit add up to profound change. With a heart full of hope and a life I'd intentionally recreated, I looked ahead to helping others forge their own paths. In Part 10, Broader Lessons and Resources, Empowerment for Survivors, we'll gather practical tools, expert advice, and community resources you can use to navigate challenges, advocate for justice, and embrace the strength within you. Join me there as we weave together the final threads of this journey into a tapestry of empowerment and possibility. As I look back on this journey, from the shade of that cherry tree to the courtroom and beyond, I see recurring threads that weave together a story of resilience, action, and community. My path was uniquely mine, but the lessons I learned and the resources I found can serve anyone seeking to move from victimhood to empowerment. In this final chapter, let's gather those broader insights and practical tools to help survivors everywhere reclaim their lives. 1. Recognize the power of evidence. Throughout my story, documenting details, phone logs, witness statements, photographs, was the backbone of reclaiming control. Evidence isn't only for criminal cases. In every situation where you feel betrayed or endangered, start by gathering facts, write it down. Keep a dedicated journal or digital note of incidents, dates, times, people involved, and your immediate reactions. Save physical proof emails, text messages, photographs, medical reports, even torn clothing can be vital. Store these in a secure folder or digital backup. Corroborate with others. If friends or neighbors witness troubling behavior, ask them to write brief statements you can reference later. By accumulating evidence, you transform intangible fears into concrete information. That clarity not only empowers you, but also strengthens your credibility when seeking help from authorities, counselors, or support networks. 2. Build a supportive network. Isolation multiplies trauma. My friend Sally's unwavering presence and Marianne's candid insights proved that allies amplify your voice. To assemble your support team, identify trusted individuals, think beyond family. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, or spiritual leaders can all fill different roles. Attend support groups, local or online groups for domestic violence, survivors, sexual assault survivors, or caregiver burnout can offer empathy and practical tips. Professional allies. Therapists, legal advocates, and social workers bring expertise. Many communities offer sliding scale or pro bono services. Remember that support isn't one size fits all. You might need someone to accompany you to court, another to offer a safe place to stay, and yet another who can simply listen without judgment. Don't hesitate to ask different people for different kinds of help. 3. Set and enforce boundaries. Boundaries are the fences that protect your mental and physical well-being. In my story, I learned to assert clear limits. No secret phone calls in my home, no unwanted contact, no tolerance for lies. You can establish boundaries by communicating clearly. Use I statements. I need you to call before you visit, or I will not discuss this topic again. Using physical markers. Change locks, move to a new residence, or simply rearrange your living space to signal a fresh start. Enlisting third parties. If direct communication feels unsafe, have a lawyer, mediator, or trusted friend convey your boundaries for you. Boundaries may be tested, and that's okay. Each time you uphold a boundary, you reinforce your self-respect and send a message about how you deserve to be treated. 4. Leverage legal and community resources. Accessing the right resources can feel overwhelming, but knowing where to turn makes a world of difference. Here are some key places to start. National Domestic Violence Hotline, U.S. phone 1-800-799-7233, SAFE. Website, www.thehotline.org. Offers confidential crisis intervention, safety planning, and referrals. RAIN, rape, abuse, and incest. National network. Phone 1-800-656-4673. HOPE. Website www.rain.org. Provides 24/7 support for sexual assault survivors, including an online chat. Local legal aid societies. Search legal aid plus your city or county for free or low-cost representation in family law matters, restraining orders, and housing issues. National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI phone 1-800-950-NAMI 6264. Website www.nami.org. Offers support groups, educational programs, and a helpline for mental health resources. Caregiver support resources. If you're in a role reversal, caring for an elder or disabled family member, contact your state's area agency on aging or the Arch National Respite Network at archrespite.org for respite care and support. Bookmark these contacts on your phone, print them out, and share them with your support network. The more you know what's available, the less daunting it becomes to reach out. 5. Prioritize self-care and holistic healing. Healing from trauma isn't a linear process. It requires tending to mind, body, and spirit. Here are practices that helped me and may help you. Routine and ritual. My morning chamomile tea and gratitude journaling provided daily anchors. Therapeutic movement. Yoga, walking in nature, or simple stretching reconnects you with your body on your own terms. Creative expression. Embroidery, painting, writing poetry, or any art form can channel emotions safely. Mindfulness techniques, grounding exercises, identifying sights, sounds, tastes, touches, and smells can calm intense anxiety. Professional therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, EMDR, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, or other modalities can address trauma at its roots. Think of self-care not as an indulgence, but as essential maintenance. You wouldn't drive a car for years without oil changes. Treat yourself with the same respect. 6. Transform pain into purpose. One of the most empowering steps was turning my personal ordeal into advocacy. Channeling pain into purposeful action can heal both you and your community. Volunteer, whether it's a local women's shelter, legal clinic, or crisis hotline. Your lived experience is uniquely valuable. Share your story, writing a blog post, speaking at community events, or mentoring a survivor can inspire others to seek help. Policy engagement advocate for stronger laws on domestic violence or elder abuse by joining local coalitions or writing to legislators. Professional pathways. Consider careers in social work, law, counseling, or nonprofit leadership focused on survivor support. Purpose-driven action transforms victims into change agents. Remember, your survival story can light the way for someone still lost in darkness. 7. Cultivate future-focused mindsets. Finally, it's vital to balance processing the past with envisioning the future. When I moved to Chicago, set academic goals, and welcomed new friendships, I practiced goal setting, break big dreams, career changes, relocations, new relationships into small, achievable steps. Positive affirmations. Remind yourself daily that you are worthy of safety, respect, and joy. Flexibility life rarely follows a straight line. Embrace detours as opportunities for learning and growth. Celebrating milestones. Acknowledge anniversaries of freedom. First, court victory, first night in your new home, first therapy breakthrough. By balancing healing with hope, you ensure that recovery isn't just about surviving, but about flourishing. As we close this 10-part journey, remember that empowerment is an ongoing practice. The cherry tree in Millville taught me initial lessons of trust. Today, you've added branches of evidence gathering, community support, self-advocacy, and purposeful action. Wherever you stand now, whether you're at the outset of your own story or somewhere in between, carry these resources and insights with you. Thank you for walking these steps alongside me. If you found value here, please share this video with someone who might benefit and consider joining the conversation in the comments below. You are not alone. Together we can create a world where every survivor finds the courage, support, and tools needed to write their own chapter of empowerment.